There are a lot of devices and software that can be controlled over a network, and most of those we can control with DashBoard. In my career with DashBoard, I've had to control cameras, lighting control boards, switchers, water fountains, graphic engines, projectors, audio devices, huge neon signs, show controllers, recording devices, and many more. And I want to show you how to do that. For this video, I'm going to control a piece of software that's called the VLC Media Player. It's a free open source media player that's available for download, so you can install it on your machine and control it as well. I've installed it on my own computer, but I could put it on any computer that's accessible on my network. Before we jump in with VLC though, I want to spend a minute to discuss the modes of communication we typically see with DashBoard. When DashBoard needs to communicate with a network device, there's really three different protocols that it can use. There's TCP messages, UDP, or HTTP. And if you want to know the difference between these, you can just Google it. In this video, I'm going to concentrate more on TCP. I'm going to set up the VLC player to communicate over TCP. When we're talking about TCP, there's really two types of messages that we can send. We can either send strings, which are just plain text, something like recall show ABC. The other thing we can send is bytes. So some devices expect bytes instead of strings. So instead of sending ABC, we'd have to send the bytes that represent A, B, and C. Which one you're sending really depends on the device you're trying to communicate with. The devices will specify whether they're accepting strings or whether they're accepting bytes. So when you're trying to communicate with a device, there's really three things you need to know. So what protocol is that device using? Is it TCP, UDP, or HTTP? The second thing is, what commands can I send to it? So what will it react to? And the third thing is, are you sending those commands as bytes or as strings? When we're talking about TCP, there's three primary ways that DashBoard can communicate with a network device. The first way is what we call fire and forget. So DashBoard needs to send a message to a network device to do something, so it'll send the message over TCP, something like recall show ABC. Once we've sent the message, we pretty much forget about it. We don't expect a response from the network device. We just assume that it's going to do what we asked. If the device is properly configured, it will do what we asked, and we don't need that two-way communication. So how do we do that in DashBoard? With this video, you should have received three different panels, VLC level 1, 2, and 3. We're going to look at level 1 TCP fire and forget first. But before we do that, we're going to launch VLC so that we can see the effect we're having on our VLC player. To launch VLC, I'm going to click the Windows button and type CMD to get my command prompt. I'm then going to type change directory, C drive, program files, x86, VLAN, video LAN, VLC. And then I'm going to launch VLC with some specific options so that it starts listening for TCP connections. It's going to listen on port 2235. So I now have DashBoard on the left and VLC on the right. I'm going to go to Media, Open File, and I'm going to open a playlist that I have. So I now have VLC on the right and DashBoard on the left, and I have a playlist in VLC playing through a list of different videos. In my VLC level 1 TCP fire and forget, you'll find several buttons. You can see that I can pause my playlist and then restart it, or I can go to the next clip or the previous clip. I can also go to a specific clip. So I can go to number 7, or I could go to number 15. So all of these different buttons are just fire and forget buttons. So they're sending a message to the VLC and not expecting a response. So let's see how we can do that. So we're going to replicate the previous button. So I'm just going to make a button right here. And I'm going to call it previous 2. And I'm going to add a task. And then this brings us into the visual logic. And we're going to use that to do our fire and forget. So I'm just going to search for TCP up here for a control block that's TCP. And you can see that I have 4 of them. I can send a TCP message that's bytes or strings, or I can do it with a response. And since we're doing fire and forget, I don't want a response, so I'm just going to send a TCP message that's a string. I could put in my host, so the local host, and I can put in the port that I've specified, 2231. And then I can put in the string that I want to send. I want to send previous. Now in my panel, I actually have a parameter that has the host and the port. So I don't necessarily want to hard code them here. If the user wants to change the IP address or the port, they could just change their parameter. So let's use those parameters instead. Let's take the VLC host that I've created and pipe that in, and the VLC port that I created and pipe that one in. So now we're going to send it to that host on that port, and we're sending the message previous. Okay, okay, get out of panel builder mode, and now when I hit previous, you can see it's going backwards. So that's how you do a fire and forget command inside of DashBoard. So the next type of communication we're going to talk about is a message with a response. So I want to ask something of the network device. I'm going to ask it something. I want to say, tell me what your current video is. And it's going to send a one-line response saying, I'm playing Back to the Future. Typically, these messages with responses are one line. We're going to send one line to it, and it's going to reply with one line. So let's see how we would do that in DashBoard. So in DashBoard, if you open up the VLC Level 2 TCP response panel, you'll see that it's very similar to the Level 1 panel. There's a pause button, a next, and a previous, and a go to as well. But there's three new commands. There's get title, get time, and get length. Now, whenever I click those, it's sending a message to the VLC, and the VLC is responding. And whatever response we're getting, I'm just piping out into this message from server part. So if I click on get title, I'm either going to get the status change or the title. And the reason for that is that the VLC, whenever I ask it for something, sometimes will send multiple messages back. And I'm just taking the first one and showing that as the title. So sometimes I'm getting a status change and sometimes I'm getting the actual title, depending on what just occurred on the VLC player. If I do get time, I get the number of seconds into the current clip. And if I do get length, I get the length of the current clip. So how do we do this? Let's replicate the get title. So I'm going to need a button, and I'm going to need a label that I'm going to rename whenever I get the title. So let's start with the label. I'm going to put it over here. By default, it's going to have the value of unknown. And I'm going to give it an ID so that I can rename it later. I'm going to call this one the title. So this panel element now has an ID of title. Now let's make our button. I'm going to call it get title 2. And I'm going to add a task. I could do it from Visual Logic the same way I did it the other time, but I actually find this one easier to do inside of OG Script because it has a nice script palette that gives me exactly what I need. So I'm going to turn on that script palette, click in this window, and then go to OG Script and scroll down to Send TCP String with Response. If I double click on it, it gives me kind of a template as to what I need to do this. So I need to have a function that's going to get called once I get the message back. And then here's the line that actually sends the message. Send message with response. And we need to put in the host. So localhost on port 2235. And the message is get_title. Now, one thing that's important with send message with response is we actually have to terminate this string somehow so that the other side knows that the message ends. And the way we usually do that is with \n, although different devices will be looking for different types of characters to say it's the end of the message. When the other end sends the response, we also need to tell it what character to look for to say that that's the end of the response. And we're going to use the same \n or carriage return to say that's the end of the response. And then the last argument is what function to call whenever we get the response. And this template already created a function called callback, so we're just going to use that one, although we could call it whatever we want. Whenever the callback method is going to get called, it's going to get 4 different things. The success variable is going to have whether or not the communication succeeded. The sent data is going to have what message we sent. The result string is going to have the response. And then the exception is just if there's an error, what error occurred. So the only thing that we really care about in this is the result string. And what we want to do is rename that panel element with that result string. So we're going to do ogscript.rename the title panel element with the result string. And we're going to OK, get out of panel builder mode. And now whenever I click on get title to, I'm either going to get that status change or the actual title of the clip that's playing. So that's how we do the send message with response. So the last type of communication we often use in dashboard panels is what we call a listener, which basically creates a persistent connection to the network device. The other two methods, they open a connection, send the information, and then close it immediately. In this case, we open the connection and then we keep it open. So when the dashboard panel starts or when the user clicks on connect, we send a connection request, and usually the device will accept it. So now this type of communication is really useful for several things. So if you're handling lots of data, so if I have to ask the network device something like, give me a playlist, and what it responds with is multiple different clips, then I don't have one response, I have multiple of them. The other thing it's good for is for polling. So if I want to keep asking the device a question like, what's the video right now? And it'll send back Casablanca. And a second later, I'm going to ask again, what's the video now? And it'll say Casablanca. Then a second later, I'm at, what's the video now? And realize that it switched to Star Wars. And then I can update my display. So if I'm doing some polling where I'm asking the device for something every second or every few seconds, it's better to keep the communication lines open rather than establish a new connection every single time I need to ask it something. The other thing that it's really good for is for monitoring. Certain devices will actually tell you when something has changed rather than having to poll and keep asking for it. So the network device might actually tell me when something has changed. So they might tell me, hey, the video's just changed. It's now Casablanca. And then whenever someone clicks on the next video, it'll just tell me, it'll say, hey, the video has changed. It's now Star Wars. So I don't have to keep asking for it. But it's only certain devices that'll tell you these type of things. But you want to keep the communication open for that. Another thing that's useful for listeners is if you want the network device to be able to ask DashBoard to do something. So rather than us controlling the network device can now control DashBoard. There's multiple ways of doing that, but one of them is with a listener. So the network device might be able to say, I want you to trigger the lights because I'm now playing this movie. So if we go back to DashBoard, we'll open the level 3 TCP listener one. This one's more complex, and I'm not going to walk you through recreating it all. But what I want to do is I want to show you a few things. It has the same buttons as before, pause, next, previous, and go to. It also has a connect button, although this panel automatically connects as well. We have the same get title, get time, and get length, although this time they're renaming these different labels here. I've also created a timer where I can actually just put in a monitor, and it's going to just automatically ask every second, what's the title, what's the time, and what's the length. And you can see that as the videos progress, I'm getting new titles and new times and new lengths. And I can stop the timer as well. I can ask it for its playlist. So I can say update playlist, and I'm going to get a list of all the clips, and I'm going to just update this list with all of those clips. And I can double click on any of them to now play them. On the right here, I'm just going to scroll over. You can see the messages that we're getting back from the VLC player. So if I click on update playlist, you can see all of the different clips that it sent me. If I click on get title, you can see that it sent back the word octagon. You can also see those status changes that we were talking about earlier. So this little area here just allows us to see what messages we're getting from the VLC. So let's take a quick look at the listener in this panel. If we go into panel builder mode and double click on it, in the meta section, there's a listener. If we click on it, we can see some of its properties. So we can see that it's connecting as a client, it's connecting to localhost with that port, and it's expecting new lines to delimit all the messages. We've also have it set up to start automatically whenever the panel starts. So that basically creates the listener, and you can create one by clicking this listener button here. But what happens whenever a message is received is basically defined by the task that's attached to this listener. So let's look at that task. And it's pretty long because I'm doing different things with the messages depending on what messages I'm getting. But you can see that if it's a connection event, I do something. If it's a message event, I do something else. And at the bottom, if it's a disconnect event, then I'm doing something else. So I have to handle those three cases. The message event is where most of the magic occurs. So if ever I get a message, I can see what that message is by doing event.getBytesAsString. And then I can do different things with it. This log message function, which is defined below, just prints it out into that table we were looking at. And then I'm parsing the message based on different things. I'm ignoring all the ones that start with the status change. I don't really care about the status changes, so I just ignore those. And then I do something different depending on what the last command I sent was. So if the last command I sent was get title, well then I'm going to set the value of my title to whatever message we got back. If it's get time, then I parse that time and then I do something with it. If it's the length, then I parse that length and do something with it. If it's the playlist, then I looked, are we at the start of the playlist, or are we at the end of the playlist, or are we in the middle of the playlist? And if we're in the middle, I'm just adding it to an array. And if we're at the end, then I'm going to update the constraints on that list so that I can see all of the different videos. So this listener basically just listens for specific messages and handles those messages whenever it gets it. And that's how a listener is created inside of DashBoard. And if you want to play with listeners, you have a very good starting point in this panel here. You can take the listener that's there and just modify it to do whatever you want with the messages you're getting from your device.